back in March, President Moïse was not only hesitating to leave, he was systematically dismantling Haiti's democracy. And unfortunately, he was doing it with the support of the international community, including the United States. That continued through April, May, and June. Things in Haiti had gotten much worse. July was already a month marked by political violence, in a year marked by political violence. And this is just the latest of those. It unfortunately puts Haiti in a really tough place. I spoke with a human rights activist this morning and asked how she was doing, and she said, "This is worse than we ever could have imagined." And this is a country that's really suffered an immense amount, and people have pretty good imaginations about worst case scenarios. Haiti's now left with a pretty strong power vacuum. The Constitution has a roadmap for how you replace a president, but most of the roads on that map have been closed. You're supposed to have the National Assembly elect a president within 60 days. The National Assembly is like a joint Congress in the United States, where you get the Senate and the House of Representatives together, but almost all the seats in Haiti's legislature, except for 10 senators, are vacant. The Supreme Court can have a role here, but the Supreme Court Chief Justice passed away from COVID last week. Half of the seats on the court are vacant. And so really throughout the government, the type of structures that you would rely on to give you resiliency in these times have been dismantled.
So can you talk about how, I mean, just a little bit more background, how the country's, previous president Martelly, he tapped Moïse, and that was around 2016, 2017, and he had the backing of the Clintons, very aggressively, it seemed, and thus that carried over to Moïse and the Trump administration, and seemingly, at least publicly, with the Biden administration. So we're still learning information, but it sounds like there was at least one American voice in terms of the mercenaries that attacked him, according to early reports. What role potentially could the U.S. have played in this? Because he, despite dismantling all these democratic institutions, was clearly, a part of the folds of the United States foreign policy apparatus.
That's a really good point, Emma. Haitians connect those same dots. When they're talking about what's happening today, they go back to 2010 when Secretary of State Clinton pushed Haiti's Electoral Council to change the results of the elections. So Michel Martelly came in third of those elections, which meant he should not have been in the runoff. But Secretary Clinton, under a threat of revoking everybody's U.S. visas, said that they needed to change the President or Michel Martelly's place, and they obeyed, and Martelly became president. He did not get there with the support of the Haitian people, so he ran his office as if he had no popular support. He built up a very corrupt political machine to keep himself in power, and the machine was strong enough that he was able to transfer power to President Moïse in an election where fewer than 20% of Haitian registered voters even bothered to participate, because they knew a shame when they saw it. Since then, Moïse has continued to consolidate power, and as we discussed last March, really been dismantling the structures of accountability. That includes courts, that includes anti-corruption mechanisms, it includes going after journalists, going after lawyers. Really any voice that could hold the government accountable was suppressed. And unfortunately, the United States was behind that all the way. I mean, going back to President Martelly, we felt that Martelly was someone we could work with. The same with Moïse. And so ever since then, for both administrations, we've been providing generous financial support. We've been providing diplomatic support, making sure that the OAS and the United Nations continue to support both Moïse and Martelly. And so we're in a situation where the United States has supported the gathering of all of Haiti's political parties in the hands of one person, and now that person is dead, and so it really puts Haiti in a tough position. It does provide an opportunity for the United States. I think we can hopefully learn from this experience, and we can support a a democratic Haiti, one where we care about processes, where we care about fairness rather than caring about who is in charge. Because one of the things that people are concerned about now is that the U.S. is going to pick a leader, pick someone that the U.S. thinks is the best place to lead Haiti out of this and support that person rather than an inclusive process that will create a legitimate president.
Before we get into, any type of like a sense of who might have done this, and I have to say, like, it is surprising. I mean, there's other examples, but to see an assassination of someone who does have the backing of the United States, right? I mean, history for the most part has been when you see an assassination or a coup attempt, and to the extent that there is a great interest in it by the United States, they tend to have involvement on the side of the one doing the killing rather than being killed, or being dispossessed or flown out of the country. But before we get to that, reiterate for us? I know we talked about this a bit in March, but what is the U.S. interest in having having this type of hegemony over Haiti? I mean, because it is, there may be a natural desire for the United States to have hegemony over every country, but there is a more acute desire, it seems to me, when it comes to Haiti. That is obviously, and there's a long history of this, but what is it? Is it just, are we just talking about commodities?
Very good question. And you asked that of Jemima Pierre when she was on the show with me, and she gave a wonderful answer that I'll try to recap as best I can. I mean, the basic point is that Haiti has always been a bad example that the U.S. needed to eradicate. That started in 1804 when Haiti was insisting on being a free country and a country born of slaves who freed themselves in a world that was dominated by slaveholding powers, including the United States. So the U.S. would not even recognize Haiti, and Haiti was the second independent country in the Americas. So you would think that we would embrace Haiti with open arms. We did not until just a few weeks after our own Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. That was really what allowed us to at least recognize Haiti. But since then, we've continued to punish Haiti. Haiti is the country that had the longest marine occupation in the hemisphere. We've overthrown several presidents. Haiti's had 33 coups d'etats. The U.S. has been involved in a bunch of them. We supported the Duvalier dictatorship. We supported the dictatorship that ousted President Aristide in 2004. We continue to support Presidents Martelly and Moïse. And I think what we're most worried about is that Haiti is going to give us an example of real popular democracy, because that's what Haitians keep insisting on doing, that we have a democracy where the people actually get to choose their policies rather than corporations, rather than foreign interests, rather than economic elites. And that's something that presidents of both parties in the U.S. have apparently found very threatening.
But I mean, it's that I mean, I just find it hard to believe that that's that much of a threat, only because the American public certainly has no awareness of these issues, broadly speaking. All due respect to my countrymen, but I mean, surely there has to be specific industries that are really worried about the democracy, because the democracy ends up leading to, like, hey, wait a second, maybe some of the value of these resources should be focused on this country rather than on, corporate interests in some boardroom in New York or in London or wherever it is. Are there specific, is it basically just sugar? Are there other commodities, or are we looking for cheap labor? I mean, what do you, or is it a factor of all of those?
You know, I've been working on Haiti now for 26 years, and I've been asking myself that same question because we're used to thinking in terms of, you know, we invade Iraq for the oil, or we overthrow governments in Central America over bananas. But in Haiti, there really isn't a single economic interest that would explain U.S. foreign policy. Yes, there's some mining. There's a little bit of sugar. There is assembly manufacture. But all of those are really, and it comes to that this is a case that we are really worried about ideology, that we just do not want a progressive democracy to succeed. And I think you're right when you said that most Americans know nothing about what's going on in Haiti. I think you can probably say that, unless they're watching your show, about what's going on in the United States in terms of the limits of popular sovereignty and the unlimits of corporate power. And I think that if there really is just a concern that if Haiti is allowed to question the current unequal status quo, that could create, it goes back to Ronald Reagan and the domino effect. It could create a domino effect where other countries could insist on having a popular democracy, which would eventually pose an existential threat to elite rule in the United States.
I am often guilty of forgetting the precedent rule that very often is like, if you let one happen, then other countries start getting the ideas. All right,
which I think ties in well, just quickly, with the support for Guaido by Moïse, where he essentially backed the United States' position on recognizing Guaido as the leader of Venezuela. Right. I mean, that's part of the calculus here too, right? I didn't mean to cut you off, Sam.
That's a big part, Emma. And that was something that was extremely controversial in Haiti. Haiti kind of they have a self-image of being on the side of the oppressed, on the side of progressive principles in international forum. And for President Moïse to kind of switch sides on that was shocking throughout Haitian society, that he was doing that basically because the United States wanted to, required him to, and he got the payback. I mean, he felt he needed to do that because he needed U.S. support against his people, and he got it. So it was a deal that that worked out for him and for the United States, in the sense that they were able to continue to gang up on Venezuela.
So, Brian, I mean, do you have a sense of who might be behind this? I mean, it sounds like it's not just a random situation, obviously. I mean, the political assassination of this ilk, and on one hand, it throws the country into all sorts of chaos, which one can imagine it both, gets rid of a guy who was, at the very least, an aspiring dictator, it seems to me, if not a full-on one. But it also throws the country into chaos and allows for another dictatorial sort of impetus to rise, one that might be more durable and have a reset button. So it seems to me that it could have been, this serves the interests of maybe a wide, disparate number of players.
That's exactly it. It's very hard to tell why this assassination took place. There are many groups with a motive. There are many groups with a capacity to do a hit. Although people in Haiti are expressing shock that there was not much sign of resistance by President Moïse's security. If in fact that's true, then it was probably to some extent an inside job, and there's a lot of speculation on Haiti. But there's just lots of people who have lots of guns and who could operate such an attack. So it's hard to say exactly why that happened. In terms of going forward, Haitians are really worried. I spoke with a human rights activist this morning who was a pretty staunch opponent of Moïse, and she said this is worse than we ever could have imagined. Right. So she's worried about things getting much worse, and I think that's a pretty broadly shared view. I think that Haitians, They didn't want President Moïse dead. They wanted him out of office and their democracy alive. And there's, lots of risks of things getting worse. I think there is an opportunity for things to get better. And I think that's an opportunity for U.S. policy. It's an opportunity for Haitian voters. In order for that opportunity to be seized, the international community needs to make a decision. And again, the U.S. will take leadership on this. So if there is going to be support for this, it has to be the U.S. taking the lead on supporting a process that leads to fair, inclusive, and broadly accepted elections. What the risk is that the U.S. is going to again decide who it thinks can best lead Haiti and put all their support behind him.
Brian Concannon, Executive Director of Project Blueprint, advisor to Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for covering Haiti.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.